after Election Day 2020, and we're here with Sioux City Journal political reporter Bret Hayworth to talk through the results. And Bret, a big takeaway in Iowa, a good night up and down the ballot for Republicans in the Hawkeye State, and that started at the very top of the ticket.
Absolutely, yes, that's right, Cole. Donald Trump won Iowa for a second election cycle in a row. He won pretty handily in 2016 and also again won last night, coming out ahead of Joe Biden here in Iowa. And there was polling that showed it was a fairly tight race, and Trump indeed pulled that out. And then there was also a U.S. Senate race, which was highly watched here in Iowa. Joni Ernst was the Republican incumbent who was coming off of her first term and running for re-election for the first time, and she was up against Democrat Teresa Greenfield and was able to win that one as well. Also a very tight race down the line, just scads of campaign ads that came out of that, so much money that Greenfield in particular raised, and Ernst a lot as well. But ultimately Ernst did pull out that win.
Another congressional seat staying in Republican hands is the House seat in Iowa's 4th Congressional District, but a new face will be representing much of Northwest Iowa in Washington.
Exactly, Cole. That Steve King is the person who is departing here in about 2 months. He was defeated in a primary election where Randy Feenstra, who is a state senator from Hull, defeated Congressman King. Congressman King had won 9 terms over 18 years, so that's a big change for the 4th District people who represents them. And Feenstra won over J.D. Scholten last night in the Tuesday voting. That Scholten was the person who narrowly lost to King by only 3% 2 years ago, and that was one of the things that moved Feenstra to pretty much right away in 2019 throw his hat into the ring to say that he wanted to go for this. And again, Feenstra ousted King in the June primary, and then when it came to voting last night, Feenstra very much dominated. He got 62% of the vote. He won. There's so many benchmarks where he dominated. He won 38 of the 39 counties in the 4th District, and the only county that Scholten won was in Story County, which is home to Ames. By comparison, when Scholten only lost by 3% 2 years ago, he won 6 counties. This time he only won one. One more stat. In the highly Republican rural counties, for example, Sioux County, Feenstra got above, I think it was 85% in Sioux County and 83% in Lyon County for two particulars for how that played out.
One place, Bret, where Democrats did have success at the Iowa legislative level in Sioux City, keeping 2 seats in Democratic hands with 2 experienced faces, one continuing his representation and another going back to the legislature.
Right, the one continuing his representation would be Chris Hall, who won a Sioux City district. I think he's won about 4 terms, going back to maybe 5 terms, going back to the early 2010s. And he defeated Ernie Jigaroa, who was a Republican from Sioux City. And then the face who is returning would be Steve Hansen, who is the director of the Sioux City Public Museum. He had been a legislator back in the 80s, 90s, I think about 18 years total between both chambers that he served in. Then left the legislature in 2002 to become the museum director, and then had his political comeback last night when he won that Sioux City race. He won over Bob Henderson, who was running, a Republican from Sioux City, who was running for his 3rd straight election cycle, and Henderson had fared pretty closely in his last 2 losses, but this time Hansen was able to withstand Henderson.
Political control of the Woodbury County Board of Supervisors was on the ballot last night with 3 of the 5 races up, Bret, and again, a very good night for Republicans.
Right, and now and there's 5 supervisors on the Woodbury County Board, and after last night's results, now all 5 are Republicans. And the 3 that were up for election last night was Keith Raddick, Republican, who was a former city councilman who had served 1 term on the county supervisors, and he had what a lot of people thought was a very competitive race with a very high name, high ID name recognition Democrat, Kevin McCormick, who was a former police officer. And McCormick absolutely outspent, in large manner, outspent Keith Raddick in that seat, and Raddick was able to pull it out in that win. Another race was Rocky DeWitt, who is from Lawton. He's the one county supervisor who's not from Sioux City. Rocky DeWitt won over Patty Erickson Putman, the Democrat, who is a former county employee who had worked in social services, and was somewhat fairly well known, I would say, from her role there. And DeWitt was able to win his second term. And then the third race was kind of a heavyweight matchup, I guess you might say. Jeremy Taylor was a Republican from Sioux City who was a former county supervisor who had won terms in 2014 and in 2018, but then resigned this year. He had some residency issues when he owned 2 homes, and ultimately resigned that, but then came back in a different district when no other Republicans came forward with that, and then he opposed a sitting Democratic supervisor who was Marty Potabom. Potabom is a former Sioux City policeman. Potabom is a former Sioux City councilman, so he's had a couple of electoral wins, and was coming off his first term as a county supervisor. Ultimately, Taylor won that race, and now all 5 again are Republicans when the new board comes in on January.
Looking briefly, Bret, to area legislatures, Iowa, Nebraska, and South Dakota, what did we see last night? Yeah,
there was a lot of uncontested races. I mean, this territory is overwhelmingly, especially out in rural areas, is overwhelmingly Republican. So there was about, of the 14 seats that we cover here by the Journal in Northwest Iowa alone, there was a bunch of unopposed Republicans, so they coasted to victories. There was, I believe, 4 I believe, House seats in the Iowa House where Republicans were challenged by Democrats, where they actually had a challenger, as opposed to all the unopposed that I mentioned a few seconds ago. In every case, the Republicans won those. Similar story over in South Dakota. We have 8 districts in the House and Senate in South Dakota that are southeast South Dakota, where there were competitive races in districts 16, 17, and 18. And in 8 of the 9, Republicans won 8 of the 9 times. And the sole Democrat was a guy from Yankton County who won a seat there. And out of those 9 seats, 5 of those were incumbents who were returned. And lastly, Nebraska, we had one race in Nebraska, which is District 17. Joni Albrecht won 4 years ago in 2016, and she was running for re-election this time, and she won another 4-year term.
Bret, thank you for your work today.